So Jake Morrill is a leadership coach and consultant. He's an associate faculty member at the Bowen Center and also a faculty member at the Bowen Theory Education Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he also has a book coming out tomorrow, I believe. Is that correct? The Boundaries Workbook. And he also writes a wonderful newsletter as well called Tenacious Play that I would also recommend to you all. So Jake, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kathleen. Good evening, everyone. I thought, so tonight I'm going to be talking about play in light of differentiation, and thought I would start by introducing you to my dog, Pepper. So this is Pepper. This is the best shot I could get because she is a whirling dervish. She's always in motion. Pepper loves to burst out of our front door and greet Gracie, who is a golden doodle who lives across the street. And when Gracie and Pepper meet up, one or both of them will do a play bow, dipping down to the lawn, and then they're off. They are chasing each other, tearing down the street and back and through the woods and around. They do reversals. First one will chase the other, and then the other will chase the other. When things get too rough, if they start to snarl or get upset, one will, the offender will make a little bit of an apology or a gentle motion, which is something until I started studying play, I didn't identify, but there is actually sort of a forgiveness process in the midst of play when one partner transgresses. When one is done, when they get tired, and they do take breaks and then by mutual agreement start it up again. But when one is tired, they might growl or even show their teeth to let them know, okay, enough is enough. It's time to go back to our houses. Pepper doesn't do this with every dog. I take her to the dog park and often she hides under the bench. She won't play with any old dog. She does have a couple of friends there, and if she happens to see them, if we're there at the same time, then she will repeat the same kinds of behavior that she does with her neighbor Gracie. So there are three types of play that are observed in animals. There's locomotor rotational. This is jumping and leaping, head shaking. It's vigorous body movements and done solo. Object play, clawing, digging, nudging, bumping, construction or stacking, and in more complex forms. And then there's social play. And I've just been describing social play. And so social play is what I'm going to be focusing on this evening. And there are familiar behaviors or attributes that can be observed in social play. First, role reversal, the taking turns, who's the aggressor, who's the defender, and switching pretty fluidly between those two. Secondly, self-handicapping. And you can think about a parent playing with a child or any large play partner or dominant play partner. It wouldn't be very much fun. The play wouldn't last very long if everyone was going all out. So in play, the more dominant partner inhibits behaviors or uses deliberately unsuccessful strategies so as to maintain a certain amount of tension, sort of competitive tension in the play. And then social play also has any number of play signals or meta communication. So a person could have their arms over their head and be growling like a monster, but they might give you a wink to let you know that they're not really a monster. I mentioned the dog's play bow earlier. And there are some pretty characteristic qualities of play signals in body language. Stiff and alert body posture often means we're not kidding around. This is serious behavior. More curvilinear movement, loping movement. You might notice a person or an animal with their head cocked, and that's that signals that that what we're doing is something different from real aggression. So play takes up a lot of time and calories in various species. And I think about the excitement, at least near where I live, about the Kansas-North Carolina basketball game later tonight. Play occupies a lot of our attention and a lot of our own effort, and more or less, across species. So how to understand this this thing that consumes so much of our effort and focus, and that seems to appear across species throughout evolution. A lot of what I'm drawing on this evening and I've been reading and thinking about is the work of Gordon Burghardt, who's an ethologist at the University of Tennessee. And using, you'll see LOS here on, and he's got placental mammals. That's locomotor, object, and social, the types of play I was talking about before. He's really compiled a broad range of research and has been able to map where play shows up. And here's primates. So all three types of play. Primates are a very playful group, but also we've got fish, surprisingly, and turtles, and other. Burghardt even claims that snakes play. So so play really is broad and pervasive, and animals can play across species. You can, on YouTube, you can find videos of tortoises and dogs playing together, etc. It's a challenge to think about play and to talk about play. There are certain frameworks that sort of take hold that make it difficult for people to think, to be thoughtful about it and to really observe what's happening. E.O. Wilson said, no behavioral concept is proven more ill-defined, elusive, controversial, and even unfashionable. Brian Sutton Smith was a researcher of play, and he gathered together 7 rhetorics or sort of ways that people tend to conceptualize play. So for instance, a progress rhetoric of play would have people looking at it as if it's behavior that's meant for learning. Identity would look at things like carnivals or things that uphold community identity and heritage, that sort of thing. So being aware that there are biases built into each of these ways of looking at play is important. So what is play? This has been a challenge through the centuries to really define it, this elusive thing. Gordon Burghardt again has said that play is when 5 criteria are present. First, there's limited immediate function. So the performance of this can mean 2 things. The performance of the behavior is not immediately gratifying. It doesn't get an immediate reward. Or secondly, another way to understand this is that the behavior is perverted or stunted somehow. So someone who pretends to be running might develop a lope or might fall down, and that would put it in the category of play. The second criterion is endogenous component, and this idea is that the behavior is spontaneous, voluntary, pleasurable, rewarding, that it's sort of done for its own sake. It's not coerced. It's not. It's self-generated. The third criterion is structural or temporal difference. So sometimes play is in its motions and gestures imitates functional behavior in different contexts. However, it is when performed outside of that functional context, then it becomes play behavior. This might mean pretending to cook an egg when you're nowhere near the kitchen. You're just sort of miming cooking an egg away from the the place where you would do it. Or it might mean a young person pretending to be an old person, or an old person pretending to be a young person. So decontextualized behavior is that third criterion. The fourth is that it is repeatedly engaged and repeatedly performed, which is not the same as stereotyped or rote, which I'll get to in a moment, but nor is it the same as novel. And as I say, I'll get to this in a moment, because it sort of occupies a middle space where there are familiar characteristic gestures, but not rigidly performed. And lastly, that it emerges from a relaxed field. Animals don't play when they're backed in a corner, when they're starving, but when they are in relatively well provided and safe environment. So if all five of these, if it's not immediately functional, if it seems to be self-generating, voluntary, pleasurable, if it's not making sense in a particular context, but is separated from that, if it's involves repeated performance, and if it emerges from a relaxed field, then Gordon Burghardt would call this play. And so here's what I was mentioning before, that novelty is not the same as play. So I think about, just as an example, if I see some object and I haven't ever seen it before, and I go over to investigate it, I might nudge it, I might smell it, I might inspect it. That's not yet play. However, as I become familiar with it, if I begin to manipulate it, if I even throw the object as a frisbee to a friend who then throws it back, this can become play. Then, if the friend and I say that we're going to meet at noon every day and can only throw this object in a certain way, and that we believe that it will bring us good luck if we do, this kind of ritualized stereotypical behavior that is more rigid ceases then to become play. So there's sort of a continuum in which play behavior would be found in the middle. Nico Tinbergen was an ethologist who won the 1973 Nobel Prize and defined 4 ethological aims. Gordon Burghardt, these are the first 4 are Tinbergen's. Gordon Burghardt added the 5th of private experience, sort of the pleasure of the thing, or the feeling of a thing. This evening, I'm looking at the adaptive function. So what difference does it make in a life for there to be play? What's it good for? What does it produce? And there are some thoughts about that. For instance, Stephen Porges talks about play as neural exercise, a way to learn self-regulation, and he specifically talks about peekaboo, and the idea that you can see the adult and the child there. is that through hiding one's eyes and then showing the face, that the absence and then the return creates arousal, anxiety, and then relaxation and calm, and that through this repetition of higher arousal and then calm, higher arousal and then calm, that it helps develop the capacity to toggle back and forth between those states, which can be helpful later on. So self-regulation. Ellen Sandsetter talks about play as training for the unexpected and fear management. So she talks about 6 universal categories of risky play in children: play with great heights, rapid speeds, dangerous tools, dangerous elements, rough and tumble, and disappearing or getting lost. So a way to master fear. And so there does, related to the Stephen Porges thought, there does seem to be something about, albeit from a relaxed field, as Burghardt mentions, this deliberate move toward or engagement of anxiety and arousal. And there are other people who sort of see the play as a means of reducing hostility and promoting cooperation. Mark Beckhoff talks about play as a way to develop morality through negotiating safety, through apology. I mentioned the forgiveness gestures that my dog and the neighbor dog go through. So exercising these ways of relating to each other. Another, Giada Cordoni, talks about identifying adult play more common in pack hunting animals like wolves, who rely on cooperation. And so developing the capacity to cooperate. And others talk about how adult social play happens at particular moments, either of reunion after separation or prior to mating. So play, it becomes sort of a trust building or trust reestablishing exercise or behavior. And then there's some interesting research on on 2 kinds of macaques, hierarchical and relatively egalitarian, and with the observation of much more play in egalitarian macaques. And some of when I was talking with Gordon Burghardt, one of his takeaways from this is the thought that in an egalitarian society where there's a lot more ambiguity and complexity and just a lot more flux to negotiate, that play develops the capacity distributed across the population, different from a rigid hierarchy where there's not much reciprocal or mutual negotiation required. So in all of these various forms of developing the capacity to relate nimbly and effectively in relationship with one another. Stuart Brown was really a pioneer in play research, and the founder of the National Institute of Play. He got interested in play when he was asked to be part of the team researching Charles Whitman, who was the University of Texas shooter in the 1960s. And to his surprise, one of the things that he came upon was Whitman's play deprivation as a child. Charles Whitman had grown up in a very rigid, anxious household with a demanding father. And, Stuart Brown, as he began to interview others with similar adult behaviors, noticed that there was this similar lack of play as children. And so he's one among many of play researchers who really tout the benefits of roughhousing, perhaps for the reasons that in the previous slide of trust building, negotiation, et cetera, et cetera. And Brown found similar patterns in alcoholic drivers killed in auto accidents. And so related to what Brown found in the play deprivation in humans is the play deprivation versus a lot of play in Syrian hamsters. And so this is research where male hamsters were either group housed with peers or with their mother, and Syrian hamsters do not play with their mother. So the ones with peers, did a lot of play, and the ones with mothers did not do a lot of play. And then in adulthood, these respective hamsters received acute social defeat stress. And the idea is, imagine these Syrian hamsters going and meeting their worst bully. So this happens, in both cases. The ones who had not grown up playing did not have that sort of bounce back, the resilience to recover from the experience of social defeat. The ones who had played were able to bounce back. So thinking about what we've heard about play, and then looking at differentiation of self. This is a slide that I think is just helpful in a very simple way to represent a pretty complex concept, with the idea that with more anxiety, that differentiation of self has two dimensions: intrapsychic within oneself and interpsychic between self and other. And that when there is greater anxiety, there's more entanglement between the intellectual and emotional system. With less anxiety, there's a disentanglement of the two intrapsychically within a person. Between one and the other, there's same thing of the entanglement or fusion, and then with less anxiety and greater differentiation, less entanglement. So Murray Bowen developed a conceptual scale of differentiation from 0 to 100, and with the idea that there is a basic level of differentiation established when, by the time someone leaves their childhood home, but that out in certain contexts, someone might be able to perform, to function in higher or lower ways than their basic level of differentiation. And I've been thinking about what would it mean to think about play along some kind of scale as well. And two people have tried to do this in the past. One is Robert Fagan. Fagan is famous for studying grizzlies, and so he had sort of levels that went up in sophistication, from level 1, brief jerky movements, single actions performed repeatedly. Level 2, social but non-contact play. So parallel play is a way to think about that. This would also include locomotor rotational play, that kind of vigorous shaking, head shaking and twisting that you heard about earlier. Level 3, friendly social play. Level 4, becoming more complex, and games outside of the stereotypical pairings. Level 5, play involving special intimacy or cognitive interaction. So we see that it goes up sort of from isolated and rote to complex and relational in that level 1 to level 5. Robert Mitchell is another researcher who's developed kind of a scale of play, and he's similarly goes from more sort of basic repetitive play to that which engages more context, more nuance, more complexity as it goes up from his level 1A up to level 4, with seeing parody, or you might say wit, as the highest level there. So I just have this thought about how could it be possible to observe, to establish a correlation between less mature or less differentiated play behavior in humans, especially, and more complex, more mature, more differentiated play behavior. I think about bullying or repeated jokes or sort of rote and dominating behavior on the lower end of the scale. And novel combinations of concepts or complex relationships, maneuvers on the higher end of the scale. So this is something I'm just starting to play with this year about could such a thing be developed? I'll close with this quote from Robert Fagan, who says, "In a world continuously presenting unique challenges and ambiguity, play prepares these bears for an evolving planet." So the idea is that there is something about play that builds the capacity for resilience, for engaging fear and anxiety, for engaging challenge, for this kind of self-directed behavior in relationship and in a shifting environment. So I'll stop there and see what discussion there might be.
Thank you. If folks can use the raise hand function down at in the bottom bar on Zoom, the reactions icon, if you see that, I'm assuming folks know how to do that, but I'll give people a moment to use their brains. Dr. Collier?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to pick up on maybe your last two slides. I mean, I found the presentation so interesting. I took quite a bit of notes. I've seen you present on this, but not to this depth. So I really was taking in your literature review. Thank you. But I was just thinking about how could play, you used the term correlate. I wasn't thinking correlating, but I was thinking in just the way individuals use the 4 nuclear family emotional mechanisms to manage anxiety, how some of the ways that you described play, how you could look at, or I could look at, sort of the flexibility in the nuclear family emotional mechanisms, or how people, can incorporate what you would call play, but where I could see being just a more relaxed sort of posturing, less rigid, less ritualized, more cooperative. I heard you talking about some of the requirements of play. But I was just thinking about what that would look like in people who are lighter about the nuclear family emotional mechanisms, families who have lighter intensity, really. I mean, I'm just sort of thinking about an emotionally intense family, how that can offer room and freedom for people to have some of these types of behaviors that you've described. So it got me thinking. And I'm also thinking about the way you describe play, less rigid, less ritualized, more cooperative, and how people can interact in triangles even. I think if people can be a little more witty in triangles, or approach it in a more relaxed field, or from a more relaxed field, how different that can shift a triangle in one's position in it. So it just got me thinking. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's play can be such a resource when tension goes up, and I don't know that it dissipates tension so much as channels it, or sort of focuses it in a way. And I think when people, I'm thinking about marital conflict, if there's that a playful version of that might be to exchange roles, or even to say, well, let's not fight right now, let's fight tomorrow at 5 o'clock, or something that showed some self-possession, but without sort of shrugging it off, I guess is what I talking with Gordon Burghardt, I was trying to wrestle him to the mat, because he's worked for 50 years on this and talks about play as coming out of a relaxed field. And yet my observation of play is that it seems to be the conscious movement or engagement toward anxiety, toward trouble, rather than away from it. So there's something there in what you're saying that I'm trying to figure out, that I haven't gotten to yet, that I think is related to how one relates to anxiety, other than, just dissolving it.
Stephanie Ferreira. Stephanie.
Thank you. Well, it brings up a lot of questions. I was thinking, in our society, a lot of what we do for play is sports. And yet sports is, we sort of have a way of making it dead serious, with high stakes and winners and losers. That I was wondering what would you see as the relationship between play and humor?
I see humor as a subset of play. That play, I think. So with, for instance, sports, I think you're right that when they become so serious that it becomes a matter of pride or identity, then it because it has that, because it begins to become more immediately functional, I think it ceases to be play any longer. So I don't think that play is described by certain behaviors so much as qualities, or that's why I like Gordon Burghardt, that his criteria, more than describing certain motions. But I think, well, yeah, I guess I think humor is a subset of play, and it is more the relational quality than any particular content. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I liked Dr. Bowen's point about if you have to work on neutrality, and that means keeping the right degree of closeness and the right degree of distance. And that when you were in that play, when you're in a neutral place, you can tend to see the humor side of something. That when you're kind of caught in the anxiety of it, you don't see any humor. When you can see the humorous side of something, you're less caught in it. I think too, with humor, people flock to the comedy clubs and so forth. One of the things that you experience there is a lot of emotional contagion, that when one person starts laughing, you know, suddenly everybody's laughing. And how enjoyable that is for people, you know.
Yeah, it is. And I think when I think about play at the higher level, I think about, you know, almost like a wisdom teacher or somebody who's, you know, who has that self-possession, who's not being caught up in contagion, but who is sort of thinking, as you were you know, who's able to observe the humor but not be hooked by it. They can choose whether or not to be humorous, I guess.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Laura?
Oh, hello. I'm Laura Tiemann, and I work in Fairfax County Public Schools. And I have to thank my dear colleague, Stephanie Herman, for telling me about this presentation. So just a lot of gratitude tonight. I have a background in play therapy, so part of my intrigue is being able to be open and learning a lot more about play than outside the therapeutic realm. But one thing I did want to mention tonight is that I've seen a lot of young children take things that feel very overwhelming that they can't put words to, that they feel very anxious about. For example, in the sand tray, and bring a sense of containment to that. So something that's abstract and out of their control, then they can kind of choose items that are outside of themselves and allow them to relate to that anxiety, difficulty, stress, trauma in a different kind of way. So that's a lead into my question or wondering, which is that I know with the impact of the pandemic, one of my worries is around play deprivation, especially for certain subsets of our population, I would say under age 5, who haven't really had as many opportunities to be able to do that spontaneous play. And then I was reminded of that with some of the things you were sharing tonight. I was wondering your thoughts on that in terms of what you've noticed especially in relation to kind of trauma and getting in the way of that brain state that would keep someone from being able to fully express themselves through play. So I was wondering about that.
Yeah. Well, what do you think?
I think that I can't stress it enough in the school system, and it's been a little frustrating for me because everything's so structured and there's such natural work that children do that some of the struggles around behaviors and challenging behaviors I see as children need those opportunities to have those playful opportunities that maybe they missed out on for a while as a contributor. But I know I'm very biased towards, we haven't played enough. That's a bias that I have throughout the lifespan.
One of the observations I've heard about the pandemic is the absence of serendipity, that if because so much of people's experiences and engagements are like this, pre-programmed and on Zoom with a particular agenda, that some of what's lost is the chance meetings, the hallway conversations, the time and spaciousness to, be to engage in emergent behavior, which play certainly is. So that's one of the things I think about relative to the pandemic.
That is very helpful, the kind of the spontaneous moments that naturally emerge. I guess I have a related question, somewhat related, which is around play and the development of gender identity. And I guess that's just a question I have, as we have many students who are dealing with different gender identity in different stages of gender development, and trying to sort through, for me, the impact of the pandemic on one's developmental trajectory, and wanting to affirm students, and also being mindful that that development is complex and there's so many factors at play.
Yeah, thank you. I will
Jean-
say,
sorry.
related to the spontaneity and the emergent quality, just as sports in a certain context engaged in a, in a certain spirit, no longer becomes play, there are also, I've just seen it in the last few months, there are behaviors that seem to signal play, but are not done in a playful, or not done, playfully. There was one person I was on a meeting with who plunked a jester's hat on his head, but he wasn't smiling, or nothing else about him suggested an invitation to play. So I think, again, it's not the particular behavior, but it is something about the context, the how it arises, et cetera, that makes it play.
Thank you.
Jean Blackburn.
Hi, Jake.
Hey, Jean.
Your presentation took me back 50 years. When I was young and youthful, and I was the director of nursing at the psychiatric hospital in Chattanooga. And I went back to graduate school. And the nurse who took my position as the director, I did not want to come back to that position. So I came back as the clinical specialist working in the nursing department. Well, I'd always been, if in fact things are uptight, you work harder. The director was a person, if things are uptight, you have a party.
Mm-hmm.
So she and I had to work out this tension that we had between us. And I learned that parties were better solutions for resolving tension and getting the anxiety down than working harder. That's what I learned over 50 years ago about play.
That's great. I can see that a nursing supervisor who only and always relied upon parties, where it became sort of rote mechanistic behavior. I don't know if you've seen the show The Office, where the Michael Scott, the boss, he's somebody who I think engages in play behavior, but it's done in a mechanized way. But it
Right.
sounds like this person you met knew how to catch everybody up in some fun and some lightness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Made a difference in the organization. So
Yeah.
thanks for taking me back 50 plus years.
Margaret Markison.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for this. So I'm just wondering, I know you thought about play and leadership over the years, but I'm wondering about what has this later research, most recent research, done for your thinking about play in organizational life?
Well, I do think about Michael Scott a lot from The Office. About, I think that the leader in an organization has outsized influence on the climate, the relational environment, and when to use organizational jargon in VUCA times and these uncertain, ambiguous times, it behooves an organization to have more capacity to adapt and be nimble And if a leader can establish that climate and invite that character of relating and cooperating, then I think it forges a more resilient work system rather than a more brittle one. And yet, you know, I think about how can a leader be invitational and not dictatorial? Because as soon as it's coercive, then it's, by Burghardt's definition, it's no longer play. I don't know. What do you think about it? I think you may have thought about it as much as I have.
Yeah, I have thought some about this, and I thought about that the way that it's, you know, each leader brings themselves to the task of being light about the work in a different way. You know, so somebody is going to throw a party, but somebody else might have a playful attitude just in the way they're present in a meeting. And yeah, I think there's probably, you know, an unlimited ways to experiment with this, but keeping it in mind is I think in the service of you know, getting stuff done together.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Ryan Lloyd?
Yes, thank you for that, Jake. That was excellent presentation. And if I heard correctly, you are clergy?
Yes.
Okay, I am as well. You've got me thinking in that extended family, so to speak, in that family realm. In what ways have you found play to be beneficial in working with a congregational system?
Well, a little over a decade ago, well, I guess this was after the 2008 recession, there's a lot of anxiety in the church about money, and a lot of pressure on me to fix the big problem. And there was a leader who was pretty playful herself, and she came in the middle of a church service, and dressed in green, and put a spell on me where I had to wear a big gold glitter hat until all the pledges came in, and that I couldn't ask anybody for pledges, and that I was just captured by her. And so this was a way to let the congregation know that I wasn't going to work myself to death shaking them down for pledges. And it also, some of the church elders didn't like for their minister to be walking around town in a tall gold glitter hat because it was embarrassing to them. And my response was that when all the pledges were in, the spell would be broken, and I'd be able to take off the glittery crown. So the pledges came in pretty quickly that year. But more importantly, I just got myself out of being pinned like I had been. And I guess that's a more public example of what I think I try for on a regular basis in a board meeting, or et cetera, just to maybe like Dr. Collier was saying earlier, it's trying to use it in triangles. What about you? How do you use it in your ministry?
Well, I've been toying with the theory for about 4 years. So I guess like everybody, I screw up quite a bit, and then I just learn how to do that better next time. But I had two men in specific would attack me after I would get done with a sermon, and they always had trap questions, and they just had it out for me. So I got with a coach, and he started helping me learn how to have more playful responses. And I just told one of them one day, he was like, Ryan, I can't believe you did this or said this or whatever, because it means this. And I just kind of looked at him and grinned, and I said, oh man, I got that from a Playboy article. I read the best commentaries. And man, I mean, we were in a group of 20 people after church services, and he turned beet red. He didn't know what to do, and he froze up, and he didn't bother me for at least 2 months.
Yeah.
So that's one way I've toyed with it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, staying light and unhooked. It does, when my dog Pepper is playing with Gracie in the front yard, she to play with the neighbor dog is not to be in control. It's to make a gesture that then gets a response that then is responded to. So I think one of the risks of playfulness is that it can be vulnerable. It can be a risk. It's different from trying to establish dominance, but perhaps more constructive for that.
Yeah, it can be very dangerous. I'm learning that there's a balance in there where you don't want to take it too far, and yet, the right amount of it is like magic. So, that's fascinating as I play with it, as I play with play.
That's right. Well, keep at it. Sounds like a
Yeah,
great
thank you.
experiment.
Kathleen Colley.
Thank you, Jake, for a topic that's always of interest to me. I would just add in Bowen theory, when people are working at differentiation, knowing oneself is such an important part of that. And knowing in the generations, in my case, how humor operates. How does it bind up anxiety? How is it used as distance? When is it at the expense of another person? And I have really found that in my clinical work, to take up the study of this and how it works in the generations, in the family unit I grew up in the family unit I'm in now, has been just essential to my functioning in the clinical setting. Because there are very serious people who come in with very humorous spouses, and it's very easy to hop into that triangle in my head quickly inside with the one that's more fun if I'm not really, really careful. I am on it all the time in myself because I'm from a family where it's so automatic. It's just the go-to thing that people do. And that can be very risky and not respectful to other people. So I find it just important to take it up and to take a look over a long period of time to how it operates in the functioning of a family. So thanks again for helping me think about it.
Yeah, I do think it can be a real resource. I mean, I think this is, for myself, why I'm trying to work at a more precise understanding of it, because I know in myself, it can become just an anxious go-to. It can be distancing, and so yeah, to know how can it be thoughtfully picked up and thoughtfully put down by choice rather than fueled by anxiety. So I work on that. I work on trying to be more serious these days.
Don't go too far with that, Jake.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question or comment? Give people one last chance. Yeah, Sue.
I've been thinking about play deprivation during the pandemic and quarantining, especially for those of us who live alone. And I'm curious about puzzles and games, which are it feels like play to me, like if I play Wordle, as long as I don't get too serious about it. And I have a variety of things that, just kind of wake up my brain in the morning. And I think they help teach me experimentation, flexibility, not taking it too seriously. And then there are these funny back and forth between friends, Facebook friends and colleagues. And I'm just wondering if maybe the popularity of something like Wordle or the new games on the Times crossword page like Spelling Bee might be a kind of an outgrowth of play deprivation for some of us during the pandemic. I wonder, curious what you think about that.
Yeah, makes sense to me, and certainly a workout for engaging complexity and ambiguity, all of that. And that kind of puzzling, I guess is how I think about it. You know, it has been a challenge for me to figure out where that fits in the non-human animal typologies, and maybe it doesn't, or maybe I'm not understanding it right. But certainly, yeah, it's pervasive and appealing and intrinsically, you know, it's compelling in its own right. So I don't know, how do you think about it in light of your experience?
Yeah, well, I think what I've already said, about, you know, why it feels like play to me, would be something about what I think about it, that I think it helps me, just remind me to be less attached to results. It relaxes me to sit, you know, after I've been spending a few hours writing a memo or a sermon or something like that, and just going into my chair, probably with the cat on my lap, and and coming up with anagrams in spelling bee. So it, but if I, you know, if I had more people around me, I'd probably be doing other things. I'm not much of a sports person. I have no hand-eye coordination at all, but well, there are other social word games that are fun too, and I think have that same function. So I guess that's, yeah, I was curious if that was a promising line of thought or
I
not.
think, yeah, I think it is. I am, yeah, it's been a challenge for me, or maybe I should say it's been a puzzle for me so far to figure out where puzzling behavior fits in with all of this other stuff that's studied. So,
Yeah. Well, it makes me think, I wonder if somebody's written about cats playing, because I think some cats are very social with each other, but I know a lot of cats who won't let another critter near them, and yet my cat has all kinds of ways of playing, either with me or with the toys. So solitary.
there is research I love to tell people about from the 1970s on cats that rebuts the idea that play in juveniles is just skill development. It's sort of playing house or learning how to behave as an adult. In this research, the play, so usually kittens pounce and leap and tumble. They do sort of hunting behaviors and predatory behaviors in their play. When kittens are deprived of play when they're young, as adults, they can hunt just fine. What they can't do is relate well to other cats. So the play deprivation affects their capacity to navigate relationships.
Wow.
Yeah, I just think that's fascinating.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
This is John Swallow. Do predatory species that are looking for food engage in play as a way to try and con or trick their prey into getting closer or whatever, and when they reach out and grizzlies get them, and what about like humans and their dogs and other pets that and horses in play? Two different questions.
Any deceptive maneuvers used as part of predation wouldn't be play, because it would be for, immediate benefit, or whereas play is by definition not immediately functional. So there can be functional deception, but that's different from play. And what was the second thing you said?
Yeah, humans and playing with their dogs. I mean, my brother spends 2 or 3 hours a day quite often with his old dog who accidentally got hit by a car, and the new dog, and obviously humans and horses go back thousands of years together, and polo and other sports are on horse and horse racing or on horseback, or greyhound racing for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot written about the coevolution of dogs and people. And I think I haven't gotten there yet in my thinking about play. I think I've mostly have understood play in individuals who then enter into relationship. But I think the nature of certain kinds of relationships and the play in those relationships, not in the players, is a different perspective. But so far it's beyond me. Anyway.
And Curran?
Thank you.
Hi, Jake. This is Ann Curran.
Hey, Ann.
I have 2 kittens that I've had for almost 2 years now, or a year and a half, who have grown up together. The first one came about 3.5, 4 months before the second one, to replace 2 cats that died in the first months of the pandemic. These kittens are delightful. I still call them kittens. I'm trying to get around to calling them kitties, but they don't feel like cats. They're either very affectionate or they're playful. And the playfulness, I take them for walks. I have a neighborhood, and I do it just before dark, so it's not really dark, so I can see them. One's black and one is gray. But they train themselves to be responsive to me, and they playfully enjoy each other more and more as they're comfortable with the surroundings on the walk. So I repeat the same trail, in the community. It's walking on roads. And so when a car comes, if they're playing and playful and going back and forth across the road, they will go to one side, might be each to one side, and crouch down and let the car go by, and then come back and start following again. But they're really fun to watch because they sort of let loose and relax and enjoy themselves and come home exhausted, which I love because then they sleep well. That's, to me, different from humor. Humor has I can't, because I haven't done the research, but I've certainly heard other people talk about the physiological response or reaction to actual laughter and humor that gets into the physiology in a chemical way. And I don't think of cats as laughing, but their playfulness certainly does change the atmosphere in them. And then they're more relaxed. But I'm just making those comments based on what I heard Stephanie Ferrara talk about. And I do think that there is a difference. And I do think playfulness has a number of ramifications. One is learning new roles as children for watching adults in their roles. And then one is just letting go with a friend you can trust. And it's usually that. If it turns around and becomes bullying, that's not playful. That's a whole different can of worms, it seems to me, and very hurtful. So I think a lot of what you said is very helpful to focus it on and learn about. But I do think each has physiological effects that I would be curious to know more about.
Well, I never know how to pronounce his first name. I think it's Jaak Panksepp, Yak or
Yonk.
yeah. That may be somebody to look into, who looks
He's
at
talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's his field. And yeah. So anyway, I think the research is out there, and I think, you know, in my view, finding a way to connect the you know, the more physical orientation of Gordon Burghardt with the, you know,
Mhm.
the neuroaffective perspective of Panksepp would that'd be interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Dave Mullen.
Hi, Jake. Looking forward to the book. And the talk about animals and play reminded me of, I think it was Ed Friedman who talked about the reptilian response, about how reptiles are not really playful animals, and there may be people who'll argue about that. But this notion of evolution and moving toward more maturity, that mammals being a somewhat later developing life form with a larger brain and less amygdala. I've been doing a lot of work or thinking about the relationship of mindfulness and Bowen theory, and thinking about how, you know, I worked in education for 30 years and had to deal with many parents, many of whom were fairly humorless in their approach to life and their children, and how important it was to have that lightness and that sense of humor, and to and how that correlates with that differentiation scale. Anyway, it's been a fascinating talk.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Dr. Pepper.
Hey, Jake, let me put my video on so I'm not hiding from you. I never am quite sure what to do with the talk on play myself. I was sitting here thinking, as I heard you, back to the work of Paul MacLean and his assertion that the evolution of mammals led to the introduction of 3 new things into the chain of evolution. One was nursing, the second was the separation cry, which is a reflection of the attachment, and the third was play. And people tend to focus on the first 2 and not on the evolution. What's the point of evolution of play? In other words, if you take Tinbergen's 4 proximate and ultimate structures to think about it, and try to think about an evolutionary function for play, you begin to get into the complexity of it. I knew Jaak Panksepp and had conversations with him off and on over the years. And as you probably know, he believed that rough and tumble play was absolutely essential for children to learn. And as part of his laboratory at Bowling Green, they actually had a kind of a school they ran, and they had a playground in which the kids were allowed to do basically all the rough and tumble play they wanted. The adults didn't interfere with it. And he argued that it was absolutely essential for learning. And I mean, which is another good example of where scientific knowledge is lost in the subjectivity that now in our public school system has tended to reduce play for children, which is just exactly the opposite, if Panksepp is right, of what should happen. So I don't know what to do with it. It gets into the therapy world. It comes back periodically that a therapist's goal is to get people to laugh. And so that the therapy session becomes a stand-up comedy routine. And that's never seemed to be very useful ultimately over time. Therapists try to be funny and mostly they become pathetic. But there is something about the ability, someone said it earlier, I think perhaps Stephanie Ferrara commented on it earlier, this ability to get in a more neutral position where one can comment either about from multiple perspectives about what one is perceiving. That seems to be useful. You can make a comment just about the opposite side of something, which is often funny, if the person making the comment doesn't have a dog in the race, isn't trying to make something happen. It's the having the dog in the race that seems to get into trouble here. So I don't know what to do with it. As you know, I'm an oldest and I was born terminally serious. So the whole idea of play strikes me as a bit absurd. But anyway, that's obviously you've hit a chord with a lot of people here tonight, and I hope you'll go somewhere with it. I'm a bit more dubious about the link between differentiation and play, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I'm interested to see where you go with that, because I don't know that that's necessarily linked to the level of differentiation itself. It might be, but I don't know that I've seen any evidence pro or con on that one. I've seen people who I believe have a very low level of differentiation who are incredibly funny and who play all the time. And I've also seen people with a relatively high level of differentiation who don't seem to play much. Now, I don't know. Yeah, again, how do you define play? You get into what you're trying to grapple with there. So I'll be interested to see where you come out with that. But I remain watching, but not necessarily buying it at the moment. On the link between play and the level of differentiation of self. I'm only right about 10% of the time nowadays, so you can probably prove me wrong pretty easily, but I'd still stay on that one. Just because something is there and it's useful doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to the level of differentiation of self. And I think that's something that those of us who work with the theoretical orientation have to be always careful about, that we're not just picking up things and mixing it into a concept and using our subjectivity to justify that mixing. I'm not suggesting that's what you're doing, but I'm suggesting that's always the dilemma when these things, when one gets into this without really substantive evidence, first of all, about the level of differentiation and then the relationship of play to that. So anyway, I know you're about to embark on a research project on systems and play, and I'll be interested to see where you come out with that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to stay open and skeptical myself of this forced fit between differentiation and levels of play, and or qualities of play. There's just something about the capacity to effectively engage ambiguity and complexity where I sense resonance. I just and I don't, when I think about someone with a lower level of differentiation who is hilarious, I would think about that kind of person as being like in the comedy club with the contagious laughter, that there's anyway, that's I still have just a rough sketch of it, and I take the caution to you know, if it doesn't go together, it doesn't go together. But
yeah, I would hear that, you know, and I think it's an interesting thing. One has to grapple ultimately with what are the brain structures. If you can define play precisely, then you have to grapple with what are the brain structures. And it would appear to have something to do with those sorts of things that reduce the discomfort associated with stress. That would be one possible pathway through which brain structures operate in response and in support of the play process. It would also probably have to do somehow with the channels of catecholamine release, primarily dopamine, and it's how is that connected to the play release, and what's the difference? For example, if we're into that, what's the difference between the dopamine processes that support addiction versus those that support play? I mean, these are pretty serious questions that have to be grappled with neurobiologically ultimately. but I think it's an interesting thing to think about. There's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that the state, the emotional state that people find most satisfying is one in which they have very little emotional tension and a high level of metabolic energy. So they're energetically calm in a certain sense.
Like the
And
flow
that seems
state is.
that's the flow state, Shikshama high. But there's also research to support that beyond Shikshama high. You know, and that's kind of what people seem to be shooting for so much of the time. And I don't know what play has to do with that either. I mean, what you find in athletics or in the performance of any sort of skill class, a musical thing or anything, that people get better and better and better by practicing something. But those moments of flow where everything just falls completely into place occur randomly and infrequently at best, even among extraordinarily skilled people. And so I don't know what that has to do with anything. It's just a big wide area. So good on you, go for it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think I have been assiduously avoiding the brain so far, and I probably need to steer there next. I will say with the rough and tumble play that you mentioned earlier, I often hear about that in the context of juveniles, and I find myself more interested in adult play and wondering what would be the version of that. You know, would it be physical or only verbal or conceptual, or, you know, and does it, you know, is it only useful earlier, or, you know, humans are wired to, you know, to be lifelong players, but I'm not sure what the adult version of rough and tumble would be.
I don't know either, and it's too bad. I wish Jacques were still alive. He would take that question up with you. I mean, he died a couple of years ago, which I consider a great loss to the world. But yeah, I don't actually know in his writings if he addresses that or not. It might be interesting to look and see.
Yeah.
I don't know. He does pick up in looking at rats that adult rats will laugh. Right. He became famous for a while for demonstrating that rats will laugh in response to being tickled. And those are mature rats. Those are not juvenile rats that are doing this. So I don't know what it would be, and maybe it doesn't exist in that particular fashion. In fact, that perhaps that is one of the things that disappears with maturation, the rough and tumble physical nature of play into something that's more cerebral or something. I don't know. I have no idea. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. Thanks.
Would rugby or American football be considered the adult equivalent of rough and tumble play, or am I way off?
There aren't many 75-year-olds playing rugby. Again,
Well,
I would put that in the level of things that belong to the more juvenile personality up to a point. There's what's the difference, for example, when people do that for fun versus when they do it for a living? At what point does a sport cease to become fun and become a profession? And does that change the nature of it? I don't know the answer to these things. I'm not trying to argue with you about it. I think it's an interesting thing. I thought about that. But most of the real rough and tumble things, at least for males, probably are given up by the late 20s for no other reason that people get injured in them. And they can't keep it up. So anyway, I don't know. I'm talking too much. Somebody else got a hand up.
We've got another question or comment. Veronica? You're muted.
I got the video on halfway there. Just a question about the different pathways that Dan was talking about in terms of addiction versus play. Stirred in me the question about, because I work with adolescents, and a lot of them get into the gaming and into internet kind of those games that some of them are interactive online, but there's just such a surge, an upsurge in addiction. And, you know, I work with kids who aren't going to school because a lot of, you know, just how much that addiction is impacting on functioning. And just wondered whether anybody else out there had any further thoughts or yourself in terms of play and just the detrimental aspect of that play. When does it get to be unhelpful and sort of, I guess, going down to the lower differentiation of self? That's probably where that part fits in to your concept of how it interacts with differentiation of self. Any comments or any thoughts about that?
Well, I think about the book Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal, who's a game designer and game theorist that came out a little over 10 years ago. And her message is that that games are so constructively absorbing that other things out in the world should be gamified. And as I've thought about it, I've thought how she says every game has four components. It has an object, it has a feedback system, it has rules or constraints, and it has voluntary participation. And as I've thought about it, I think she's really talking about structures that maintain arousal through novelty. I mean, maybe that's related to the puzzling we were talking about earlier. And while there is complexity and ambiguity to engage, I see that as different from, well, I guess the social play that just seems to have so much benefits. And maybe I'm just echoing back what you're, so if I'm hearing you right, you see in these video games, you were saying that they had addictive qualities, different from other forms of play.
My understanding is that there has been a bit of research on that, and just in terms of the dopamine function and just how addictive some of the technology is becoming, and just and I guess the same for adults with the slot machines and all that kind of thing, the sounds, the lights, the rewards, and that kind of thing. Just, I guess, yeah, my question is, like, it sort of impacts, I guess it sort of intersects in terms of the parenting and the play deprivation, and how much it's sort of bringing up a whole lot of questions in my head about how much limiting of that kind of play is, it's a useful and important part of the parenting piece. And because of the addictive nature of some of these games. So
I think
yes, it's raised a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about I used to be a big fan of Jane McGonigal's, and now I've become skeptical because I think she is talking just about offering predictable arousal, opportunities, that it's not, nothing's being developed. It's just, that good feeling. But what I'm thinking is my kids both play video games and they also both play chess. And I'm trying to figure out, do I just have a bias against one and for the other, or is something categorically different happening in those experiences? And I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. It's just an interesting time of when that brain, you know, isn't fully developed in adolescence as well, and how much of that capacity to limit that play is there in terms of, you know, the putting on the brakes, and how much that is being, I guess, taken advantage of perhaps by game developers, and to suck them into and keep them going. And I guess that's where it you know, it becomes less helpful and more addictive, and therefore impacts functioning in a whole lot of areas. So anyway, that's just I'm thinking aloud. I guess that's part of the questioning process, linking up a whole lot of other things. And the question of people on the spectrum is another issue, as to their inability to take cues or to read cues in terms of play in conversation, and can't take jokes and that kind of thing. And how does that, what does that mean in terms of their capacity to, and what is their play like? I guess their play may be quite different. Doesn't mean that they don't play, but they're not able to participate in the same kind of way. Anyway.
Interesting.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. So if our next, is it Mylan? Apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correct. If you can make it very brief,
Yes.
we'll take one more.
Sure. Thank you. You can call me Livia as well. So I just have a question. I was thinking about the subjective and objective, like a definition of play, because you try to give some like sort of a definition of what is play in your presentation. But I was also thinking, it seems like sometimes people have a very subjective thinking about what is play. For example, I remember I have a professor who did a lot of work or sitting in a lot of advisory board or some sort of serious job. But when I asked how he managed to do it, he was like, oh, I'm just it's like for fun, or like playing with it. So I was thinking, like, if it is like that easy, or to have some sort of like a definition of what is play. And also I was also remind me about the humor thing, when in the humor in the social context, like what's happened in the Oscar with the Will Smith thing, like one is thinking is like funny, but while the other could feel very offensive. So how we sort of like a define, or like, what do you think about that? Thank you.
Cats playing with mice. The cats can be playing and the mice are not playing. So it's possible for one partner to play when another one's not. Nico Tinbergen said that play could not be scientifically studied. He said it was impossible. And Gordon Burghardt is trying to lay down some objective standards. So I'm betting on Burghardt for now, but if those who think that play can't be studied objectively or observed, objectively, are not alone.
All right. Well, I'll thank you so much. I think we're going to have to wrap up this evening. Thank you again, Jake, for a wonderful presentation, and everyone else for your comments and questions. Hopefully we'll see some folks on Friday for our spring conference. And our May lecture is going to be with Kent Webb, and he's going to bring some folks with him. So it's going to be a multi-person lecture about the Murray Bowen Archives Project. So definitely go to the bowencenter.org to check that out. And I hope you all have a good week.
Thank you. Very good.